So actually, the biggest enemy of Islam is not even the atheist, not even the the secular atheist humanist. The real biggest of enemy of Islam is human Islam. So on this next slide, yep, right here, you can say here, yep. So you can see this picture, right? So you have a lot of different people, but in the middle I put Daniel Hakekachu. He's the one with the hat, who's looking to the right side, right? And he is battling human Islam. What is human Islam? Human Islam is Islam on the outside and humanism on the inside. It's the so this next slide is just Jonathan Brown. He's a Muslim leader, very similar to Dr. Yasir Qadi. He said, "I fully support the people to actually insult the Prophet in the United States." So he is saying, we need to support free speech laws, because if we want freedom of speech for our Islamic speech to call people kafirs and to call them, very, very bad things from the Quran, then we need the free speech to protect their right to insult Muhammad. So he said this because he was trying to be intellectually honest. But if you go to the next slide, you can see Daniel Hakekachu was very, very angry about this. And he made a 4-hour video refuting Jonathan Brown and what he was talking about. And so you can see this tension in Islam, right? Like, how do we accommodate for the West? How do we, kind of tone down our Sharia right now and keep it hidden until we are strong enough to enforce it. And there's a huge conflict about what the best way to do that is.
So what I do from this side, brother, is I will share some of the PowerPoints you send it to me, and then please be kind and guide me for the next slide, and then
Okay.
I'll kind of move on from there. So okay, so right now, yeah, I am with the slide 1. I'll let you continue, brother.
Okay.
Everything okay from your side?
Okay, perfect. Yep. So what is Islamic clarity? So like I said before, Islamic clarity is really about making Islam's teachings clear to the world in English. That does not mean that I am an expert in Islam and I'm going to teach you Islam clearly because I am an expert. No, I am asking Muslims what they believe. I'm asking them to make their own beliefs clear to the world. Okay, you can go next. You can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so I move to the next slide, but you get to see that 20 seconds after.
Oh, okay.
After
No problem.
it is
No problem.
from my screen.
So Islamic clarity is really this project to help the rest of the world, help non-Muslims and help Muslims by asking Muslims to make their beliefs clear. And you can see on this slide, we have a graph about the way British people see Islam, right? So it's a graph about how many British people see Islam as a threat to their way of life in the UK. And as we all know, there's a lot of Muslims in the UK. It's a pretty large Muslim population, especially compared to America. And you see that so many British people think that Islam is a threat to their way of life. A lot of more conservative, politically conservative Brits believe that it's a threat to their way of life. More liberal Brits are less likely to think that. But overall, there's still a huge number of Brits who believe that. And so the question is, we need to be clear about Islam, right? We don't want people thinking something that's not true. I don't want people to think that all Muslims are terrorists if that's not true, right? And I don't want people to think that Islam says nothing about terrorism if that's also not true. So the goal here is to represent Islam properly, to represent them fairly, and to make sure that people get the facts and not just what different politicians want you to think, or even what certain Muslims want you to think. And actually, that's part of what started my whole journey in this too. Is when I first became friends with a couple of Muslims, I was very confused because they were such nice people and they would tell me these things about how it was such a peaceful religion. And then I saw the things on the news and I read things online and I really didn't know what was true about Islam. And I heard something very helpful. Someone told me, he said, if if someone says, look at my Muslim friend, he's such a nice person. How could Islam be about violence or be about anything bad? And then you can say to them, well, I have a Muslim friend too. His name is Muhammad, and he's a better Muslim than your Muslim friend, right? Muhammad is always the best Muslim. And so we can always look to the life of Muhammad to get clarity on what Islam teaches. And we can go next. So again, this is something that we see not just in the UK, but also across the Western world. And even right now with France, I would say too.
So next slide is about titled as Islamic clarity.
Yep. So it's basically on the next slide, we're talking about what are we doing here at Islamic Clarity? We're asking questions. How old was Aisha when Muhammad slept with her? Do you believe that's morally right today? Do you believe Muslim men can shake hands with women? Do you think women can go to the mosque? These are just questions. I'm not saying that you're bad for believing that. I'm just asking you a question. Using hashtags like Bukhari Gate, Quran Gate, moral Muhammad, using these hashtags to help us have this conversation across the internet. So many people can use these hashtags in different places, and also searching, right? If we want to know what does Zakir Naik think about dunking flies into the water with its wings or camel urine, you can just search on YouTube, right? He has so many videos. He has over 1 million YouTube subscribers. So find those videos, you can clip them, and you can upload them on your YouTube channel. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's a great way to help the world get Islamic clarity. So if someone's searching for Zakir Naik, they can see, oh, he believes that you should dunk, fly wings. That's very interesting. And that's good to know. We can go next. So again, the approach is to ask, to use hashtags, and to search. So in this chart, you can see we have non-Muslims on the left hand. So there are non-Muslims who don't know things about Islam, like Muhammad sleeping with Aisha when she was 9 years old. So there are those who don't know and who would accept it, like some progressives, political progressives. They would say, oh, that's just their culture. Then you have non-Muslims who don't know and who would reject it, like most Westerners. So if most Westerners found out that Muhammad slept with a 9-year-old, they would reject it. They would feel like, oh, that's very gross. That's very bad. But the problem is, or one of the problems is, they don't know. They don't know that fact. And then on the right hand, you see a chart of Muslims, right? So you have Muslims who know about these things. People like Daniel Haqiqatjou, Muhammad Hijab, and Yasir Qadi. And they're trying to defend it. They're accepting it, and they're trying to put it in a way that makes it nice and appealing to non-Muslims. Then you have Muslims who know and reject it, like Dr. Shabir Ali and Mufti Abu Layth. These are more progressive Muslims, you could say, who see the facts in their books, but they find a way to say, no, that's not true, or we reject that. And then on the right-hand side, you see the people who don't know and who are Muslim and who don't know about these things, like the masses of people who live in the Middle East and North Africa. A lot of them don't know, but if they found out, they would accept it. They would say, yes, it is okay to marry and sleep with a 9-year-old girl. That is okay because the Prophet did it. Alhamdulillah, right? They'd be very proud of it. But then you also have a lot of Muslims who don't know and would reject it. So these are especially second generation Muslims who live in the West. So they might have parents who came from Pakistan or other countries, Muslim majority countries, but they were raised in the West. They have a much more Western way of thinking. And so if they found out about these things, they would reject it. And so with these red arrows, you see where these people will go. So when they find out about these things, some of them will become like Muhammad Hijab, where they will try to defend it. Some of them will still be Muslim but reject it. But many of them will move to the category of becoming non-Muslims. Many of them will apostatize, will leave Islam and reject it. And there I have David Wood and Apostate Prophet as just two very public and famous people who are non-Muslims who know about these things and reject them. And that's one of the really interesting things about Islamic clarity. Islamic clarity is not trying to get people to move to a certain place, but it is interesting to see where they will move after they get Islamic clarity. And that's their choice. Everyone has their own choice of where they want to move, what they want to believe, but at least they deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know the facts. And that's what our project is all about. You can go next.
Yeah, next slide is up.
Okay. Yeah, so I think a big thing for Islamic clarity is the opposite of Islamic clarity is Islamic confusion, right? So hashtag Islamic clarity is good, hashtag Islamic confusion is bad. So we have a lot of Muslims who are trying to hide what Islam believes and what Islam thinks. People like Andalusi, Linda Sarsour, Yasir Qadi, they're very unclear about many things. And so they don't want people to know what Islam really teaches. They don't want people to know what Islam really thinks. I wonder why. I mean, we can ask and we can guess about why, but it's important to have that Islamic clarity. If we don't even know what someone believes, how can you evaluate if it's true or not? I don't know if what you believe is true or not if you won't even tell me clearly what it is you believe. And that's why people like Daniel Haqiqatjou, who's a very conservative Western Muslim, I believe he is actually very supportive of things like Islamic clarity because he wants it to be clear too. He thinks that a lot of these leaders are too liberal, that they are watering down Islam. And so he says, I want you to be clear about where you stand. Do you believe in killing apostates or not? And so he's demanding them to be clear from a more conservative perspective. So actually, even Muslims should be supportive of Islamic clarity because even Muslims should want to know what their religion believes and teaches. Go next.
Yeah, next is up.
Okay, so here we have Muhammad Hijab. So he is talking about wife beating, and he's talking about his position on wife beating. So this was on an interview where he said this verse, Quran 4:34. You know, as I think most of us know, it says, you know, if your wife does not listen to you, then warn her, then forsake her in bed, then strike her, the rabha,
Yeah,
right?
so
And he says
if
this
you
is
fear that your wife is
yes,
going to be disobedient to you, and then it gives
yes.
you the structure. Yeah.
You know much better than I do, Hatun. So he says this is telling a man or a husband how to defend himself against his wife. Oh my goodness. Like wow. Like this is literally his quote. This is what he said and I put the whole context there so people can't say it's being taken out of context. There's a video on my channel about this and he literally is saying that this verse is about how a husband can defend himself. And so you can see how he is interpreting this verse. And I'm not trying to judge his interpretation, but I just want to put it out there so people can read the very clear verse and people can read his very clear interpretation and they can decide for themselves, is he twisting the Quran to try to fit and make it Islam seem more appealing to Western people? Is this Muhammad's interpretation? Is this the classical interpretation for 1,400 years? Is Muhammad Hijab better at exegeting, and interpreting scripture, the Islamic scripture, than the Prophet himself? So these are all questions people can ask, but we can't even ask these questions until we know what Muhammad Hijab says. We can go next.
Yeah, next is up.
So here we have some of the different narratives that Islam has been telling the world. One of them is there are scientific miracles in the Quran. You know, Dr. Zakir Naik, you know, brother asks a good question. So, you know, this is and I'm not doing that to mock him, but it's just, you know, he's the one who made it very famous. And he says, you know, there are scientific miracles in the Quran, but that has now been debunked. Even Hamza Tortzes has come out and said, you know, let's stop doing that. It's embarrassing. It's a bad look for us. We need to stop saying that there are scientific miracles. Then they said the Quran is perfectly preserved dot for dot. And you're very familiar with this at Speaker's Corner. They've been saying this for years, for decades even. And it's just not true. It's just factually not true. And now with Yasir Qadi's interview, that is also being destroyed. That lie is being destroyed. The miracle of the number 19 in the Quran is something else that people used to say and is also falling down. I think the next narratives that are going to soon come and are going to be put under a lot of scrutiny and attention are about Sahih Bukhari and being a trustworthy collection of hadith, right? You already have people who are questioning this, who are telling us things like, actually, this whole hadith collection is really dependent on just a few people, and we don't even know how reliable those people are. And then also, of course, the question of Muhammad being a perfect example for all time. So those are narratives that are still being pushed out, but are possibly going to be the next narratives to fall. And we can see that these narratives are falling, but a lot of people are still using them, right? So it takes a lot of work to address them, to bring facts up in order to evaluate and to see if they are true or not. We can go next.
So as
Yeah.
I move to the next slide, I'll just want to kind of share something. For I think it was 2000 2016, I did have discussions on reliability of the Sahih Bukhari
Yeah.
at Speaker's Corner. It was so funny. So one Muslim, so like I did research, talked about like how there were lots of Sahih Bukhari and then they got lost, all kind of put together all the traditional account together. There was one Muslim like, oh, we take it to the dot, and then
Mm.
other Muslim is just like, oh no, we cannot trust Sahih Bukhari, we cannot trust Sahih
Right.
Bukhari, and then
Right.
in the middle there is another one, oh no, we judge what Sahih Bukhari says according to Quran.
Exactly.
I think that video is still up probably in Fanda Films or in DCs. Yeah, it's one of the earliest we did while Jay was here. It was amazing, like how even that's like 4 or 5 years ago, Muslims
Yeah.
were already put Sahih Bukhari under the bus.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
I think we are officially waiting Muslim scholars to express that.
Right, right. And it's what's so amazing is we're going to talk about this more, but there's a civil war happening in Islam right now, especially in Western Islam. There's a huge war that's happening between the more liberal people and the more conservative people, right? The more reform-minded people and the more fundamentalist people. They're having an absolute war and they're attacking each other like crazy because of the different interpretations that they have. And if we go next, we can talk about that more.
Yep, next slide is up.
Yep. So right now there's a civil war, like I said. So we can go next. So actually, the biggest enemy of Islam is not even the atheist, not even the the secular atheist humanist. The real biggest of enemy of Islam is human Islam. So on this next slide, yep, right here. You can say here, yep. So you can see this picture, right? So you have a lot of different people, but in the middle, I put Daniel Hakekachu. He's the one with the hat who's looking to the right side, right? And he is battling human Islam. What is human Islam? Human Islam is Islam on the outside and humanism on the inside. It's the Muslims who tell you Islam is a great religion. It's a religion of peace, but all religions are good. You just need to be a good person. You know, that is actually in many ways one of the most popular forms of Islam in the West. Many of the Muslims in America actually believe that, right? They believe Islam is great. It might even be, an amazing religion, but what matters is that you're a good person and you can go to paradise. That is poisoning Islam at its core. And that is more dangerous than almost anything else because it's taking people and they're not really following their religion. And so you see the picture of the hijabi influencers who have taken off their hijab. That's a big problem. And so Daniel Hakekachu is attacking this type of Islam. Then you see Yasir Qadi, our beloved Sheikh Yasir Qadi, and Omar Suleiman, and other people like Jonathan Brown in the corner, Ilhan Omar with the hijab. These are people who are watering down Islam, basically. They're not doing it on purpose, but they're trying to create a balanced Islam, right? Their idea is that I want to bring Islam for the 21st century. So Yasir Qadi will say things like, it's okay for women to come to the mosque. They can pray in the mosque too. A more conservative person would say, no, that's not okay. But Yasir Qadi is trying to update things. But Daniel Hakekachu is fighting against these people because he sees them as watering down and basically ruining the religion. Then on the other side, you see Farid, right? Farid, he's really trying to attack everyone else, the Christians, the atheists, the scholars, the non-Salafi Muslims. He's trying to defend conservative Salafi Islam from all these enemies. And Hatun, what is one of his favorite, I don't know if you're familiar with his work too much, but one of his favorite things to talk about is how hadiths are weak, right? He's like, oh, that hadith is weak, or, oh, you don't know Arabic. But the problem is when you're always talking about how hadiths are weak, then you're inviting people to look more closely at hadith science and to study it more closely. And what you find when you study hadith science is that all of it is weak, right? None of it is reliable. And so that's going to be a big problem for Islam because they have to defend something that is now going to be more closely scrutinized. And I think it's like a house of cards that is going to fall. We can go next.
Yeah, next is up.
Okay. So here we see the big war that's happening in Islam. So you see Daniel Haqiqatjou with his face on the right side with the Salafi refuters. These are the more conservative Muslims who are saying things like stop compromising to the LGBTQ, stop compromising and doing interfaith work, stop trying to water down the Quran. We need to kill apostates. We need to kill the homosexuals. Like, these are things we need to be proud of. And then you have on the left side the more big dawah, the people who are more connected with the politicians, who are in control of some of the bigger institutions like Yaqeen, like Maghrib Institute. And these are people who are kind of the more famous leaders. They're the more polished people, the people who have a nicer, prettier face for Islam. And so there's a huge war happening right now between these two sides. They're fighting on the internet. If you go on Muslim Twitter, they're just completely attacking each other all the time. And it's really, really a big problem for Muslims, really. I don't know if you want to add anything, sister, or
No, brother, I'm just enjoying. I'm just like thinking you must have lots of time to just go and follow those people and then try to figure out which one is like best deceiver or best lie or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, next.
Yeah, next is up. This is
Okay.
actually, I find this is very much disturbing, but I'll let you to explain for us.
So this is something. So this is Omar Suleiman, who's in the black. He's wearing the black hat. He's a big Muslim leader in America. He has led prayers in the Congress, in front of the whole U.S. Congress. He's one of the leaders of the Yaqeen Institute, which is a huge Muslim institute that is very relatable. They try to help address young Muslims' doubts. And he had a huge controversy just a few weeks ago, where he was doing a march for refugees and migrants, kind of like against Donald Trump's immigration policies. And it was an interfaith march. So he was with people who claimed to be Christians, with people professing Jewish leaders, and they were marching together. And they were even doing like some like pouring out libations, pouring out ritual oil on the beach, making declarations, and video footage of this went out. Daniel Haqiqatjou made a big deal about this, and it exploded across the Muslim Twitter, Muslim social media. And people were attacking him like crazy. They were saying, you are kofar. This is associating partners with Allah. This is blasphemy. And they were attacking him. And then a lot of the big dawah, like Yasir Qadi, were coming to his defense indirectly, saying, oh, you people, you're uneducated. You don't really understand how complicated things are. Omar Suleiman had to come out and apologize, but his apology wasn't very strong. And so people like Daniel Haqiqatjou were attacking him for that. So there's just a huge, huge controversy all over the place. And what you saw there is the tension that's happening between people who are trying to be more strict about Islam and people who are trying to make Islam fit better in the Western world. And you can see this tension all the time. And so what does that mean for Christians and for non-Muslims especially, or even for Muslims who are looking for Islamic clarity? Well, it means you can ask them questions like this. So you can ask your Muslim friend, do you think it's okay to do interfaith work with other religions? Do you think it's okay to do activism if you're partnering with people from other religions? Do you think it's okay to host a pastor at your mosque? So just ask them these questions, and all of a sudden they're forced to decide what they think. And then, of course, when they say something, you can always bring it back to the hadith, bring it back to the Quran. Well, Muhammad had said this, so how do you reconcile that? How do you put that together? And so again, when you look at the conflicts between Muslims, it really helps you to see good questions that non-Muslims can ask. Questions that will help us to get more clarity on Islamic beliefs. So this next slide is just Jonathan Brown. He's a Muslim leader, very similar to Dr. Yasir Qadi. He said, I fully support the people to actually insult the Prophet in the United States. So he is saying, we need to support free speech laws, because if we want freedom of speech for our Islamic speech to call people kafirs and to call them, very, very bad things from the Quran, then we need the free speech to protect their right to insult Muhammad. So he said this because he was trying to be intellectually honest. But if you go to the next slide, you can see Daniel Haqiqatjou was very, very angry about this. And he made a 4-hour video refuting Jonathan Brown and what he was talking about. And so you can see this tension in Islam, right? Like, how do we accommodate for the West? How do we kind of tone down our Sharia right now and keep it hidden until we are strong enough to enforce it. And there's a huge conflict about what the best way to do that is. If we go to the next slide, we can see a little bit about Bukhari Gate. And this is really, really interesting. So it's just like you were talking about, Sister Hatun. There's a huge conflict right now in Islam about Bukhari, because the problem is this. Bukhari has taken on a very high position in Salafi Islam, especially the conservative Western Islam that Farid and Daniel Hakikachu are a part of. And they basically have put Bukhari at the same level as the Quran. So if you question Bukhari, then it's like questioning a central pillar, the heart of Islam in a way. But the problem is, if you do that, why are they doing that? Because Bukhari is where you get so much of the religion, right? It's where you learn so much about Muhammad, about the practice of the religion. The 5 pillars of Islam are not in the Quran. The 5 prayers and how to do them are not in the Quran. It's all in the hadith, right? In the trustworthy hadith. So if you want a very strict, very, very exact, how long to have your beard, how to step outside of a door, how to sleep on your pillow. If you want that kind of Islam, you need to respect Bukhari. You need to have a very high view of Bukhari. But the problem is there's other things in Bukhari that are a little bit awkward. For example, Muhammad forgetting verses of the Quran. Muhammad being bewitched by witchcraft. Muhammad, touching and having inappropriate relationships with women. Those are all things that are in Bukhari. But if you accept Bukhari because you want this very fundamentalist, strict Islam, you have to accept all these other things. And that is where things are getting very awkward for people like Farid and Daniel Hakikachu, and even for Yasir Qadi, because their theology, their paradigm forces them to have a very high view of Bukhari, but then they also have to defend and explain all these awkward things. And most of the time they would try to hide these awkward things. But at Islamic Clarity, we don't want people to hide anything. We want them to make it clear. So we want them to make their positions clear on some of these more awkward things. And go to next.
Yeah.
So here we see on the left, you have Mufti Abu Layth, who's a much more progressive Muslim. He would say, we need to look at the Quran first. Ha ha ha, am I right? He has a great sense of humor, and he really attacks people like Farid a lot, because he says, Farid, you're actually the one who's blaspheming our prophet. You're the one who's forcing him and connecting him with all these evil and gross things because you just want to keep your book Bukhari. You worship your book more than you worship Allah. And then, you have Farid on the right-hand side who's very, very fiercely defending Bukhari, who's all about the hadith, who's all about this kind of fundamentalist view. And he's saying, no, we need to defend the hadith. If you don't take all the hadith, even the awkward hadith, then how will you decide what hadith to choose or not? You're just going to use your Western humanistic standards. And in a way, he's right. How do you decide what hadith to accept or not if you don't just accept all the strong hadith? And then, of course, you have Dr. Jonathan Brown, who's kind of in between them. So they have different views on it, right? So one of them is saying, Mufti Abu Layth is making fun of it. Jonathan Brown is trying to find a way to, he's like, well, we can use our reason a little bit, but we don't want to do it too much because then that might open the door and then Islam might get watered down. We don't want that to happen. And then Farid is like, no, we need to defend it all. We need to, be very, very conservative in how we read it and how we follow it. So, if we go to the next slide. So here, there are just some examples. We can go through them pretty quickly. It says, the Prophet heard a man reciting the Quran in the mosque and said, may Allah bestow his mercy on him as he has reminded me of such and such verse of such and such surah. So if there are Muslims who are here, I hope there are Muslims, I would really encourage you, just Google that, Sahih Bukhari 661 556, and go to sunnah.com. This is an Islamic website. You can see it right there for you. So Muhammad forgot verses of the Quran according to Sahih Bukhari. So what do you do with that? Do you have a prophet who forgot verses of the Quran? Okay. Or do you start to question one of the most trusted sources in Islam? This is Bukhari Gate. Is it a deception or is it disgusting or disturbing? Okay, we can go to next.
Yep, next is up.
So the next one is Khadijah died 3 years before the Prophet departed to Medina. He stayed there for 2 years or so, and then he married Aisha when she was a girl of 6 years of age, and he consumed that marriage when she was 9 years old. So Muhammad slept with a 9-year-old girl. This is in Sahih Bukhari 558 to 36. It's in many other places as well, but this is just one place. Again, is this a deception? Is this not true? Is your most trusted source lying, or is it disturbing or disgusting? So you have to decide. So next.
Yeah.
So it says once the prophet was bewitched, so he began to imagine he had done a thing which in fact he had not done. Sahih Bukhari 453, 400. So again, what do we do with this, right? Like, is this true? If this is true, like, is this your prophet? Is this the prophet that is the perfect messenger of Allah, that he was bewitched? Did this happen other times? Did this, like, it raises so many questions. And then, but if it's not true, then how is this not true if this is, considered very strong in the strongest and most trustworthy hadith collection? So that is kind of Bukhari Gate. So you see this civil war among Muslims playing out when they're looking at some of their most trusted sources. And last but not least, I want to talk about Quran Gate, which is very, very exciting. So if you want to go to the next, can talk about some of the holes in the standard narrative. So just this is one of Yasir Qadi's emails. So I think we forget a lot of times in 2016, he had these emails come out. And so this was a huge, huge deal. And you can just read here. Conclusion: the preservation of the Quran cannot then be a letter for letter, tashkil for tashkil narrative that later scholars verbalize and the Muslim Ummah is taught. Not just at the Sunday school level, mind you. Rather, the preservation must therefore be interpreted in another manner. So people always say this. They say, Yasir Qadi believes the Quran is preserved. You Christians are trying to twist his words. But that's not the point. The point is he's trying to redefine the word preserved, right? Yasir Qadi is trying to redefine the word preserved. Why? Because he knows the definition of preserved, being dot by dot, is indefensible. He knows that it's completely a complete lie. He knows that it's completely historically untenable. He knows that it's completely untenable according to the Islamic sources themselves. He's aware of the problems. He knows there are holes in the standard narrative, as we all know. And so what was he trying to do in 2016? He was trying to find a solution. He was talking with the scholars like, hey guys, we need to find out a way to solve this problem before it explodes for the Muslim Ummah. But the problem was Farid said, I can't refute Yasir Qadi, so I'm going to expose him. Because Farid knew how dangerous Yasir Qadi's view was. He knew how different it was. So he leaked these emails. He sent them to someone else and they leaked the emails. Dawah man leaked them and he said, look how bad Yasir Qadi is. Don't take your religion from Yasir Qadi. Don't listen to him anymore, right? And so that happened in 2016. And then you and Jay went out in 2017 with the different Qurans, and that helped to bring, more attention to these problems. But then in 2020, he has this interview, June 8th, right, the day that will live forever, with Muhammad Hijab, where he tried to defend what he said, but he actually made it so much worse, right? He just let it all out, and then it kind of broke for the whole world to see exactly what he meant, that the standard narrative has holes in it, that no one has answers for these things, that these questions of the Ahruf and Qira'at have plagued the Ummah from the very beginning, that Al-Jazari and the very best scholars have never been able to solve these problems, that there are 15 or so interpretations, and none of them answer all the pressing questions, right? The point here is there's a huge problem. And again, we can see in this quote on this other email, he says, problem: how then can we understand the Quran as being kalam Allah, the word of Allah, when there are clearly some human aspects to it? Right? So he's clearly saying there are human aspects to the Quran. There are human aspects to the Quran that we have today. And he's now trying to find a way to reinterpret preserve, to reinterpret these words, use the fallacy of equivocation. They have a word for this in Islam. It's called munafiq, right? Someone who says the right things on the outside but hides their doubts on the inside. And that's what people have accused Yasir Qadi of doing. But I don't think Yasir Qadi is necessarily like trying to destroy the Ummah. He's trying to save the Ummah, right? He's trying to say, let's find a new way to define these words that is actually defensible. But the problem is when you change your definition of the word perfectly preserved, that's going to affect your theology. Okay, how is it the perfect word of Allah if it's not perfectly preserved? If it has human elements, what does that even mean anymore? And so the conservatives see this and they're panicking and they're trying to shut down Yasir Qadi, and they're also trying to shut down the critics of Islam. So we see just this huge dumpster fire going on right now in Islam. Yeah. We can go next.
Yep.
So on this chart, you can see on the yellow layer, a lot of people are ignorant. They thought that there was one Arabic Quran forever. And then they find out, oh, that's not true. So you say, oh, Farid, they go to the orange layer, confusion. Wait, help me. They go to their sheikhs, help me, what's going on? And so then their sheikh tells them, oh, don't worry, it's a multi-form text. Oh, don't worry, there's many different variant readings. Oh, don't worry, we've known about this for 1400 years. Oh, don't worry, it's all taken care of by the Qur'an. Oh, don't worry, the standard narrative explains it all. You go to Adnan Rashid, you go to Muhammad Hijab, you go to Ali Dawa, you go to Mansour, you go to Ijaz, you go to Farid. This is what they tell you, right? But the problem is that's not the whole story. Yes, that's true. Yes, there are variant readings. Yes, that's been something that Islam has talked about. But there are still holes in the narrative, right? Ibn Mujahid, how did he choose a 7? Why did other people disagree with him? What about the 50 other variant readings that Ibn Mujahid didn't pick? What was his standard? What was his criteria? Did he have divine revelation? Were all of the variant readings divine in origin? Were they mutawatir? Did all Muslims believe that they were mutawatir? So all these questions are these holes that they're not telling people. And so then you have the red layer where Muhammad Hijab is trying to tell people not to go in. You have the skeleton with the closet with the skeletons coming out. And this is the place where you realize, hey, there's holes in the narrative and we need a new narrative. This is where you have people like Yasir Qadi trying to write academic papers very quickly to try to come out with a new narrative that can fill the holes. But the problem is it's very hard to hold on to a doctrine that says the Quran is perfectly preserved and also address all of the holes. It's very, very hard to do that. You can go next. So we can see some of the attempts by people to do this. You have Zakir Naik obviously saying, one Quran forever. Then you have Farid with his standard narrative, this book, The History of the Quranic Text. It's very popular. Adnan Rashid used it in his debate with a Christian apologist back in 2013, I think. It's been out since 2003. It's very, very popular among Muslims. Then you have people like Dr. Salim, who is talking about a Hafs only Quran. Oh, only the Hafs is real. All the other ones are not real Quran. And then you have the facts first narrative of Dr. Shadi Nasser of Harvard University, where he's not really trying to please any particular theological school, but he's just trying to put out the facts. We can go next.
Yeah, I'm just moving to next, but let me just make a quick comment on
no problem.
those of us who haven't read the book, The History of the Quranic Text. Please read it. Book itself destroys Islam. Like it gives you, for example, name of 20 people who kind of so-called memorize the Quran. It gives you name of the people. Like just that book itself strongly disagrees with the Islamic tradition. And one of the things I struggled to understand for a couple of years at Speaker's Corner, and I'm still struggling to understand why Muslims are still going to this book. It's just so sad. Like I did rebuttal on this book a while back. It's just sad to see still people are using this book. Really, really bad.
Well, I think it says a lot that it's from 2003 and it's still the book that they're using, because that just says a lot. I mean, I think they need an updated book after all the 2020 stuff happens to try to pull together all the pieces and to come up with a new standard narrative, at least that's a little bit more defensible.
But even the information in that book destroys the Quran. But in somehow they think, oh, they can simply just get away with that. But anyway.
Right. Yeah. So this next slide, we can see the different streams. So to make it very clear, on the left-hand side, you have the most conservative, Mansour, Farid, Adnan Rashid, Hijab. They can't answer the holes. The buzzwords they're using now, and they really weren't using this much before, but they were talking about multi-form, textual variants. Even Muhammad Hijab admitted in a recent video at Speaker's Corner, he said there are textual variants, but then he's trying to explain how they're really just variant readings. And of course, their theology is that Muhammad had sex with Aisha when she was 9. Then you have Yasir Qadi in the purple, right, who is trying to find a way to bridge the conservative theology with the real academic literature that's out there, with the facts. And the problem with Yasir Qadi is that he is also conservative theologically. He believes that Muhammad had sex with Aisha when she was 9, and that's okay. But that's why he caused such a problem. People like Shabir Ali have been saying this for years, for a long time, but no one cared when Shabir Ali said it because he's a liberal. Who cares about Shabir Ali? But Yasir Qadi is more conservative, and so he caused a big problem. Then you have the liberals like Mufti Abu Layth who say things like dynamic preservation. Like, what does that mean? Okay, that's very interesting. Please tell me more. But of course, that allows him to have a theology where Aisha was not 9 years old. She might have been 19 years old. And then you have Dr. Shadi Nasser, who is focused on the academic and not necessarily on religious commitments. You can go next. So This is just a quote from Dr. Shadi Nasser. He says, this whole notion that the Quran is protected word by word is something that's used for the masses in a sense. It's not based on any academic research. So this was in August 22, 2020. Harvard professor, they can reject him as an Orientalist if they want, but these are the facts. Next slide. And this is from his new book that just came out. I'll just read one sentence. He says, I'm making several arguments, the first of which is to dismantle the imaginary construct of the static, uniform, and single-authored eponymous readings and their canonical riwayah. I will argue that this construct, namely a well-defined eponymous reading transmitted through two rawis, such as that of Warsh and Nafi and Hafs and Asim, was retroactively developed in order to suppress the extent of the variance, unify the eponymous readings as much as possible, and create the illusion of an ideal, unadulterated transmission of the Quran between the Prophet and the eponymous readers. So this book just came out. I know Colin from Islam Critiqued has been, reading it, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of content that comes out from this book that brings us more Islamic clarity. So that's my presentation.